There it is, the scrap bag of doom. So this is one of the projects we're going to do, pulling scraps out of the bucket and seeing what happens. In this case, we're going to Mod Podge some very cool fabric scraps onto a glass plate and make a pretty platter. So let's get right to the point. So what we have going on here is a glass plate from the dollar store. Foam brushes also from the cheapo store. You don't want to use good brushes here because personally I don't like to rinse Mod Podge out of foam brushes, so I chuck it when I can. I have them resting on my beat up silicone mat so I don't get gunk on my table, and I have butcher paper under that just in case. I have Mod Podge fabric, Mod Podge fabric, Mod Podge Matte, and Mod Podge Ultra Matte. I'm going to try one with the Ultra and one with regular Mod Podge just to see which one works better. I'm going to reach my hand into the scrap bag and pull a bunch of stuff out, and then I'll show you a little video about that. Here are the two piles I'm going to work with. I wanted to do a Christmas one, but I just don't have enough scraps. And my whole point with this project was to use up scraps I already had, not to cut yardage into more scraps. So over here we're doing fruits and veggies. We have two different lemon prints on a white background. We have cherries. We have lemons on a black background. I'm gonna fussy cut. There's an apple down here and a leaf. Some green just because I thought it looked nice with. And we got some rando leaves over here. So I'm going to cut that for one plate. And then for the other plate, I'm going to go here. We have amusing food groups. We have martinis and watermelon seeds. We have macarons, sushi. Again, I'll probably fussy cut that because I have teapots and ramen and edamame. I have my little cupcakes. And then back there I have my avocados and dancing coffee and all that kind of stuff. So the next thing I'm going to do is iron all of these fabrics and press them flat. And then I'm going to get out my Ultra Matte and my Ultra cutter with the pinking blade. And I'm going to cut these into some interesting shapes. Alright, I'm using my Ultra cutters and my Ultra Matte. I'm using the pinking blade, which gives me a serrated edge. I'm not real worried about fraying because I'm going to cover everything with Mod Podge, but I like the look of the little zigzags from the pinking blade, so that's the one I put in. This is the ergonomic handle. And I'm using my 12.5-inch ruler just because it was the first one I put my hands on. And at this point, I'm just sort of cutting random shapes. And if there's stuff that I wanted to fussy cut, and I just had to learn what fussy cut meant. Fussy cut means instead of just cutting strips or squares or shapes, you're going to make sure that you center an item that you want to see. So for example, if I fussy cut this piece, I'm going to make it so the avocado is centered on the piece, or the lemon wedge, or Mr. Bacon, or whatever's going on. So fussy cutting is, you are more interested in the placement of the piece than you would be if you were just cutting shapes. So, again, I'm just going to cut some random shapes right now, and I'm going to let the camera run and I'll speed it up so you can see I'm not doing anything particularly serious. I'm just being sort of random with the whole thing, and then as I start worrying about my placement, I'll see if there's any particular sizes or shapes or colors that I need. Here is my prepped fabric. I want to talk about a couple of different things. One is, you may notice that the pieces on this plate are much larger than the pieces on that one. There are two reasons for that. One is when I fussy cut my apple, it was pretty big, so I didn't want to put teeny tiny little pieces of fabric around my apple. The other thing is the scraps for that fabric were smaller, so it really was just a matter of scale. There's no rule about how big your scrap has to be. Those scraps were smaller. I did pull the red martini fabric out of the food one. I didn't like it when it was laid out on there, and I added some coffee beans that I remembered were floating around here somewhere. So I pulled some coffee bean scraps and put those in for balance. How do you know when you have enough fabric? What I do is what you see right here. Even with overlap, I want to make sure that my plate is more or less covered. When I go ahead and put my glue on, some of the fabric's going to flop over the side, and I'll cut that out later. And it's better to have more fabric than not enough. You don't want to have a hot gluey mess. Not hot glue, we're using Mod Podge, but you know what I mean. you don't want to have wet glue and then have to run and get your rotary cutter and cut more fabric. So cut more rather than less. So make sure your plate's covered, whether you're using big scraps or small scraps or a mixture. So for my big scraps, I'm going to use Mod Podge. I decided to go with the matte rather than the fabric. Yes, I'm doing fabric, but I'm also Mod Podging onto glass. So I'm going to go with tried and true old school Mod Podge. And then for the food one, I'm going to do the Mod Podge Ultra. If you haven't used it, it's really cool. It is the spray-on Mod Podge. It's zero tack and there's no brush strokes, which I really like. So I'm going to do one with regular Mod Podge and a foam brush and one with the Ultra. Before you use the Ultra, if you're going to shake it like you're angry with it, it really requires a lot of shaking, particularly if it's been sitting on your shelf. So you go ahead and do that, and I'm going to set up to do some gluing. The first thing you want to do with your glass plate is hit the whole thing with some rubbing alcohol and a soft cloth so you don't get lint on it. If you don't have access to that for whatever reason, just give it a good wash. You want to make sure you don't have a bunch of fingerprints on it because that will show when you are putting on your fabric. Also, I have it up on a plastic drink cup, and the reason is I don't like it when the Mod Podge pulls around the edge, which if I'm sloppy putting it on, that could absolutely happen even though it's on my silicone mat. So I have it up in the air because that's how I like it. Originally, I was going to center my apple in the middle of the plate, but I have two of them, and I think one here and one off random would be kind of crazy, so I'm just going to splat that wherever. So I'm not going to go crazy trying to center that. This is a lesson in patience for me because I am not a person that does asymmetrical well. So the first thing I'm going to do now is coat this with a decent sized coat of the Mod Podge Matte, pardon me, and I'm going to use just a foam brush. Also, as a general reminder, it seems to be hard to see because the glass is clear. This is facing down. I'm putting my fabric on the back or the wrong side of the plate. There is food safe Mod Podge. It is not what I have in my hand. So I'm going to make sure that all my Mod Podge and my glue is on the side of the plate that does not touch food. And also, while we're having this discussion, please make sure that you do not put this in the dishwasher. You can wash it by hand once it's completely cured, but it is not dishwasher safe. Also, I took this moment to pour my Mod Podge into a disposable paper plate. The reason is my brush is a little bigger than the mouth of the jar and I don't want to sweat through that. So I'm just going to take my Mod Podge from the plate and put a nice coat on the back of the plate. So you may notice that once I have got coating all the way around, I'm sort of going in here and taking off some of the excess. The reason is I don't want to take it my natural lifetime to dry. So I don't need to have too much Mod Podge. So once I'm sure I'm covered, I'm going in with a foam brush and just taking out some of the excess. Now, while it's still wet, I'm going to go ahead and start adding my fabric pieces. Willy-nilly, or at least as close to that as I can do. Because once again, I am not a person who does random well. Make sure that you have the right side of the fabric facing away from you, so it's facing up, so you can see it. And because I have a nice good coat on here, I'm starting to feel it come up. The Mod Podge is coming up through the fabric, which is helping keeping it sticky. Now it might float up a little bit here. That's okay, because when I put my last coat on, it's going to cover that. The other thing you notice, I'm just moving stuff a little bit. I don't want to see clear glass, and that's a personal preference. If you want to organize this so that there is some clear glass showing, it's your piece, and you can certainly do that. But I don't like to see the clear glass. It looks like a mistake to me. So again, don't worry that the overlaps are popping up, and make sure when you're going around sort of that round edge, you want to make sure that you've got some glue coming up on the other side. Also, as I said earlier, because I was feeling iffy about where the apples are going, I'm trying to be very random in my placement. I do not have a big a big grand plan here. Now you can see right here I'm letting it hang off the edge. That is totally fine. I'm going to trim that off later with a knife blade. So I don't want 8 inches hanging over because that's sort of a waste of the fabric. But it's totally fine to have some pieces hanging over. Because you do want to make sure that the fabric comes all the way to the edge. You also want to work relatively quickly before all this Mod Podge dries. Now I have experimented on other pieces by using fabric trim like rickrack or little bits of yarn and stuff like that, and here's why I did not like that and I don't do it anymore. It's because when you lay the plate down and you want to use it, it is uneven because it's thicker where the ribbons, etc. are. So it's thicker than it is when there's just fabric. So I have given up on that plan and I don't do that anymore, but that's why. There is method to my madness. Alright, so I'm going to hold this up so you can see all the glass is covered. I do have some scraps left, but it's not a big deal. I'll just throw them back in the scrap basket and use them for another project. And I'm going to, oop! Good thing I looked. There's a hole right there. Let's cover that up. Let's see. I think I got some lemons right there that'll go. Okay, and at this point I'm going to lift it very carefully and flip it over and look to see what it looks like on the right side to make sure I'm happy with it. This is about your last chance to move stuff, because once the glue dries, obviously you're not going to be able to move it. Now, this looks white and gloppy, and that's because the Mod Podge hasn't dried yet. But I'm pretty happy with this. I don't see any big gaping holes. I got my little bee, I got my little apples. I'm pretty happy with this. So I'm going to let this dry for about an hour, maybe 2, until I put a second coat on. It does not have to be 100% dry to get the second coat on, but it does help things. So now I'm going to go wash my hands, and then I'm going to use the Mod Podge Ultra on the other one. Okay, I'm ready to start my other one. I have all my little scrapettes over there. I have my plate up on top of the plastic cup. I have it face down. I had to rub that again with the rubbing alcohol because I moved it about 6 times before I got ready to shoot this video, and it did have fingerprints on it, so that is absolutely something you want to check. I've got my Mod Podge Ultra. I'm using the matte. Once again, shake it like it has stolen money from you. You want to make sure it's good and mixed before you use it. So I'm going to go ahead and just lay a whole coat down on it, and then I'm going to start placing the scraps like I did on the other one. And this is going to take a little longer to place because the scraps are smaller, to be honest. But if it dries out too quickly, I can always get my little squirt bottle out here and squirt some more. So I'm going to just lay my coat down first. And now I'm going to start laying pieces, and I did sort of want, let's see if I can find them, I did sort of want the avocado in the middle, so that's what I'm doing. Other than that, this is exactly like the one we already did. We're placing pieces wherever we feel like placing them. It's all very random, which breaks my head, so we'll see how well I do. I am generally speaking not a person who can do random. I tend to do everything symmetrical whether I want to or not. It's just the way my brain works. Now this doesn't seep up through the fabric as much as the Mod Podge in a bottle did, just because it's thinner, but you can definitely feel that it's on there, and you can definitely feel the tackiness start to happen. Once again, I'm overlapping wherever I feel the need. And I'm letting it lap over the edge because I can always trim that off later. It's not a big deal. So I was just checking to make sure it's still tacky around the edge, but it is. And again, if you are taking your time, if you're being more slow than I am, there's nothing wrong with that. You just might have to get your little spritzer out and give it another spritz. Gonna give that another little spritz because it's starting to dry off a little bit on the side. But again, totally not a big deal. You see, double check, make sure that you have the right side of the fabric facing the glue. All right, let's go ahead and turn it over. So you can see a couple just fell off because the Ultra dries quicker than the other Mod Podge. So I can see where I have a couple of pieces of glass that I see with nothing behind it. So I'm just going to flip it back over and reattach those couple of pieces that came off. And I'm really, at this point, I'm just getting the little bitty slivers where there's some glass showing. I will say, it does seem a little more difficult to get 100% coverage with these tiny pieces than it did with the big ones, just because I think they shift a little bit. But again, I'm not getting crazy about it. I'm just making sure I have coverage. See, we got a thing going on right there. Let's see, what have we got left? Yep, I think some watermelon will go right there. So, since I know already that this is drying, I'm going to go ahead and put my second coat on right now. I'm not going to wait until, oh, seem to have lost a little guy over here. I'm not going to wait like I had to with the regular Mod Podge, because I can already tell that this is drying very quickly. So I'm shaking one more time, and I'm going to give this a very serious coat. I want it to soak into the fabric. I want to go all the way around. I'm going to soak it until my finger gets tired. And you can see the fabric gets darker. Like when fabric gets wet, you know how it looks a little darker? You can see that the fabric is soaking up. Whoops. Doesn't want to stay on its cup today. Now the other cool thing about Ultra is it is not only a sealant, it also kind of works as a glue. So now I'm going to go with my fingers, and if I was smart, I would have put on rubber gloves or deli gloves or something like that. But I will be able to wash this off my hands. But all these little pieces that might be sticking up, I'm going to stick them down. And the reason I'm doing that, once again, when you're using this plate, you've got your cookies or your dessert or whatever on it, you want to make sure that it lays flat on the table and that things don't fall off. So I'm just going to smooth over all these corners, all these overlaps, and make sure they're laying down flat. All right, I'm going to put that in front of the fan and let that dry solid. I'm going to grab the other guy and give it a coat of Mod Podge. Now you can see, because you can see some white on here still, this is not 100% dry yet, but it is absolutely dry enough for me to put another coat on it. So again, I'm going to lay this down. I'm going to get my Mod Podge and my brush. And I'm going to give this a big coat all the way around. Remember, the thicker the coat, the longer it's going to take to dry. So if you're concerned about it drying, I would do 2 thin coats rather than 1 giant thick coat. And in the same way that I made sure the overlaps were laying down on the other piece, I want to do the same thing here. I want to make sure those little overlaps are laying down because I don't want the plate to be wobbly when it's sitting at the table, but there are far fewer to worry about with the bigger pieces. So I'm going to let these guys dry overnight. They probably don't need overnight, but I'd like to go eat dinner now. So, and then I will come back tomorrow and we'll trim the edges. Here we are back in the messy studio a day later, and let's see how our projects came out. So this is the large pieces and the Mod Podge out of the jar. This is pretty stinking cool. I like this. I'm very happy with this came out. It's stiff and sturdy on the back. All my pieces are stuck down. We don't have any bubbles or drama or anything sticking out. I'm going to take a craft knife and go around the outside and trim all this edge nonsense off. But by and large, I am pretty happy with that. Now, I do see right here, there's a little bit of a fingerprint. I don't think that I was careful enough when I wiped it down, so that's a good thing for you to know. That's what you don't want to do. You don't want to have a little bubble on there. Again, I think it's because I didn't clean the plate well enough before I started, but that's one. Now, here's our other guy that we did with the Mod Podge Ultra. And I'm grooving on this. I just think it's adorable and hilarious. I did a better job cleaning. I don't see any fingerprints or bubbles or anything like that. I have my little avocado dude right in the middle like I wanted. Same deal. I have to go around the outside with a craft knife and trim off the edges. So I'm going to say I like this one better, part of which is because I didn't screw up and get a thumbprint on it. Part of it, I think I like the smaller pieces better than the look of the bigger pieces. I mean, this was certainly faster to prep. This took forever to cut, 9,027 little tiny pieces of fabric. But I like the sort of the clutter of it. I like the idea of it. I think this is awesome. I will say on this, I have the tiniest bit of fabric popping up. So I'm going to do 2 things. I'm going to take my craft knife, cut off if I don't need it, and I'm going to add 1 more coat of the Ultra on here, and I think that's going to solve that problem. And again, it's not, nothing's falling off. It's not that. There's just a couple of places where there were overlaps that I don't think I got enough spray on there. So that's all we have to say about our Mod Podge plates. Remember, hand wash these. They're not dishwasher safe, but you can absolutely hand wash them once all the Mod Podge is dried. And I hope you have fun making your own. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel for fresh content just as soon as I get around to making it. Thanks so much, you guys. I appreciate you all. Bye-bye.